don't know if you've ever heard the name Jack Kornfield before. He's an American writer and teacher, specializing in the Vipassana movement. He said, "There is a web of life into which we are born and from which we can never fall." So this concept of the web of life has been used by multiple people around the world for quite a long time, but it's always been this purely abstract idea to represent all aspects of life and the multitude of threads that bind humanity, and also represent all the individual aspects of life, or what I call the elements, that make us. So, although the web of life, I have made it a visual philosophy, I'm going to do my best to explain it in a way that you can see it in your mind. And if you want to see it, as part of this episode, you'll get a QR code that will take you to my website where you can download the complete philosophy for free. It'll be sent to you as a PDF. But it's simple enough that if I explain it right, you should be able to see it in your mind. The beauty is, each individual person that I've ever introduced this to interacts with it themselves in their own individual way. And it depends on your perception. But funnily enough, when most people see the web of life for the first time, they read it in a circle, starting at the leftmost point. So if you were drawing a very basic spider's web, how would you go about it? You'd probably start with the addition sign or a plus, and then over the top of that, you'd draw the multiplication sign or the times. So if you imagine the plus and the times, you have the basic structure of the web of life. And although you can see them as 4 individual lines, and each of those lines in the web of life philosophy becomes a strand. Each of those parts that make up the line, they all congregate right in that center point. And in that center point, I want you to imagine the word you, or if it makes more sense, me or I. But I want you to keep in mind that this web is not only yours, but actually applies to everyone you know and anyone you will ever meet. That's the beauty of the web of life. It applies to us all. Like in The Lion King, but I'm going to remix it. We are all connected in the web of life. So, when people read it in a circle, because in the Western world anyway, we learn to read from left to right, everybody starts in that top left corner, and you find the word beliefs. Then next to that, childhood, relationships, energy, history, experiences, environment, and science. But that's not quite the way I would read it. And that's not the way it was particularly designed. That sort of shows you the 8 fundamental elements as standalone. And I always see people nodding as they're looking at it. Like, yes, beliefs, yes, childhood, yes, relationships. But these 8 fundamental elements are never just standalone. Each element shares the strand with another element. And those two have such a deep and complicated connection that you can't actually talk about one without talking about the other. For example, the time strand. That is beliefs and history. And I'm going to let you marinate in that for a minute and just think about all the connections between beliefs and history and beliefs. You can't really talk about one without the other. So if we're looking at you, if you look at yourself, if you were to tell me your beliefs, I'm kind of getting a crash course in your own history, because that's where your beliefs come from. To understand your beliefs as well, I also need to think about the history of your life with your family and your friends and all the people around you. Even if you zoom out and think about the world, you also start to look at how history has shaped some of the widely held beliefs that we have. Now that's the time strand. The one I call the super strand is childhood and experiences. This strand in particular has quite a lot of superpowers. And of all of the elements of life, childhood is probably the one that shapes us the most. It's arguable though, due to environment and relationships. But if you just think about how your experiences, even now, the way you perceive your experiences, are influenced by your childhood experiences, how many of your experiences today go back to childhood, how you might be living in the present and then flick back to an experience from your past, and a lot of it goes back to childhood. So that's why I call it the super strand. So what I call the foundation strand is relationships and environment. You cannot have a relationship without being in an environment. And no matter what your environment is, there is relationships within it. Even if you're just standing alone on a beach, you not only have your relationship with yourself, but you also have that relationship with nature. For some people, it's a positive experience. It's cathartic, it's therapeutic, it's healing. For some people, it's annoying. They can't stand the wind, they can't stand the smell and the salt in the air and the mess of the sand. They don't want to get wet. But the foundation strand is actually the importance of the foundation strand. If you just think about the first environment and the first relationship you ever had, it was before you were born. In the womb, you shared a biological environment with your mother, but it was also the first relationship you ever had. So the foundation strand not only looks at how relationships and environment are the foundation of all of our lives, but the foundation with which a lot of your childhood experiences and your beliefs, your personal history, all of that comes into play when we look at the foundation strand. And the last strand of the web of life is science and energy, and I call this the power strand. So whereas the other elements that I've introduced you to so far, they're the main ones that we get bugs in our lives. The power strand itself is kind of like the source. Science is our source of knowledge. It's our way to systematically understand all things. And energy is running through everything, everyone, everywhere, all at once. And so that strand comes up no matter which one you're talking about, because our understanding of all of the other elements comes from science, and energy is the power source that animates and brings everything to life. So in a nutshell, that's the web of life. The 8 fundamental elements and the 4 strands that make it up. Now, I kind of did it a little bit, but I'm going to introduce you to the little tool or the little trick that I use when I'm working with individuals, when I'm talking to people. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You need to be able to zoom out of yourself to be able to truly understand you and to understand the wider influences on who you are and how you became this way, but also the people around you. And so the little trick that I use that is part of the Web of Life philosophy is the 3 spheres. And It works kind of like the zoom feature on your phone, and you zoom in and out, because when you see the web of life, most people focus on the you part, or the me part, or the I part. And that's only seeing the web of life through one perspective. And the idea of not only this web, but this podcast is to give you that lease on life, that new perspective that shifts your thinking and helps you to understand you better, everyone you know better, and anyone you could ever meet. And it gives you a way to see people in a non-judgmental, objective way, because through that understanding comes better connection. So the 3 spheres helps us do this because it allows us to zoom in and out of the self. So I want you to imagine an egg. Inside you have the yolk, then you have the egg white, and it's encased in a shell. So the 3 spheres operates kind of like the egg, with the ability to zoom in and out. You are the yolk. No matter whose web of life you're looking at, the yolk is that person. In this case, you. The self sphere is what I call the you part. Now, the self sphere focuses on your relationship to each of the 8 fundamental elements and how they apply to you specifically, with nobody else involved. So this is your beliefs about everything, about beliefs itself. It's your personal history, even your beliefs about history, your childhood, your experiences, your relationships, including the relationship you have with yourself, your environments. So when it comes to science, the self sphere not only looks at the knowledge that you have, but also how you apply it in your everyday life. For example, knowing about the impacts of stress is great, but if you're not aware of that when you are in stress mode and you're not consciously noticing the physiological changes to your body, and you're not proactively doing something about it and using your knowledge of how to de-stress in the moment, the knowledge is pointless. You need to be able to apply it. So science in the self sphere looks at your knowledge and your application of science, not just for all the elements, but for you personally. And energy looks at your own emotional energy, mental energy, physical energy, spiritual energy. That's the self sphere, or the yolk. If you were to zoom out into the next part of the egg, you get the egg white. This is what I call the social sphere. Now, the social sphere includes everybody you know, no matter where they are in the world. So all your friends, all your family members, the wider society in which you lived and grew up. And if you moved around, that includes multiple places, your community, your state or territory, and your country. But it also extends out to include your region of the world. So when it comes to something like beliefs, and you're looking at religion and trying to understand why you may have been born and raised in one particular religion, you kind of need to understand the history. So the influences of wider history and why particular religions were dominant in regions of the world. And that sort of paints the picture of how your family were influenced and the people in your country or your state to be a certain religion or to follow a certain religion or to change religions. So the social sphere also includes the institutions that you were a part of or that impacted the people in your social sphere as well. So things like government and religion, education, healthcare, economics, all of those things fall under the social sphere or the egg white. When you zoom out and you're looking from the widest stance at your web of life, that's when you're looking at the eggshell. That's the world sphere. And that takes a global perspective on your web of life, because for most people, myself included, to understand me and my life and my family and the choices that they made and where we've even ended up in Australia, how that happened, you need to know world history. And that's the case for so many people. It's events on the other side of the world in a completely different time that made people start moving and changing and relocating. And so the world sphere looks at those elements, those 8 elements, from the world's perspective. Because the beliefs that I have here in Australia and that I was raised into, and the history that I was taught about my country and how it came into being, is very different, especially to the First Nations people of Australia. The Aboriginals have a very different story of history. It's told in a very different way. And when you have a look through the world sphere and you start to see how England colonized so much of the world, and you speak to people especially and understand their stories and how colonization impacted them, then you understand why institutions like education took a certain approach and told the story from a particular perspective. But that influenced me, influenced how I think and how I understood history as it relates to my country. So when you have a look at the 3 spheres, what people tend to do with the web of life is to focus on themselves and look only through the self sphere. This is why I created the 3 sphere approach, because you're constantly zooming in and out. But I implore you, instead of looking from the self sphere out, when you start to think about and reflect on the 8 fundamental elements in your web of life, start from the world sphere, take that perspective first, and then zoom in. Gives you a much deeper look and more honest and authentic. So when you're looking at your web of life, don't make the mistake that most people do, where they focus solely on the self. And it makes sense, being that you're in the center of your web. However, when you zoom out and take the furthest vantage point, when you're looking at each of the 8 fundamental elements in your web of life, looking from the world sphere in rather than the self sphere out, is the better way to do it. It gives you a more honest, authentic, and deeper perspective on the self. So have you ever noticed that life can seem to keep repeating on you? You feel like there's no newness or excitement in your life because the same things just keep happening over and over again. Some people see them as patterns, and I get that kind of thinking, but I see it like cycles. The whole world revolves around cycles. Agriculture revolves around seasonal cycles. There's planetary cycles, lunar cycles. There's economic cycles. And that's just when you look at the world. When you focus on the social sphere, we've got birthdays every year, we've got reunions, we've got tax, we've got grand finals, we've got religious holidays and festivals. These things just keep happening on loop. And then when you focus on the self sphere, all you see is cycles too. You go to work, you go home, you go to work, you go home. Maybe you throw the gym, work, gym, home, or work, home, gym, home. But that same cycle just keeps repeating. And you got weekends and weekdays and weekdays and weekends, and it's just this never-ending cycle. And then you have the chunks of time when you're at work, and then you have a bit of holiday, and then you go back to work again, and then you have a holiday, and then you're back at work again. And some people live on this cycle of just wake up, eat, work, watch stuff, sleep, repeat. Our whole world revolves in cycles, and within cycles and around cycles. Even when you're checking your bank account, you're seeing these cycles, the subscriptions coming out and the fees coming out, and everything's just cycles upon cycles and cycles within cycles. And when I started looking at all of the cycles that go on in the world, all of the cycles that happen in society, and all of the cycles that happen in my life, my own brain keeps repeating in cycles with the same thoughts. My body keeps feeling the same emotions on repeat. And I was becoming very frustrated with life because all I found was everything just happening over and over and over again. I noticed in my relationships, it didn't matter if it was friends or partners, I was getting this, it's like the same characters, but different avatars. The same things on repeat kept happening, all the deceit and the lies and the betrayal. And I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. And I know I'm not the only one to have felt that way. Even work was just the same thing over and over again. And then when I started to understand all of the cycles that go on in the world, all of the cycles that go on in our communities, and all of the cycles that I was experiencing, how could my experiences not be cycles when my brain and body works in cycles, even my menstrual cycles? These cycles are everywhere. And once I started seeing the world this way and started thinking about the web of life, I realized something. Why do spiders create webs? They make them to catch bugs. But when you see a spider weave a web, they spiral. They start usually do they go from the outside in or the inside out? But you see them going around and around and around, but the whole web within itself. And I'm looking at this spider weave a web one night on my balcony, and I'm thinking, if I was a spider, there's no way I'd be weaving that way. That's not how my life is. I'd be jumping from strand to strand and spinning a circle on the spot. And then it hit me all of a sudden. It's the bugs. That's what we do. That's the mistake that we make. We get bugs trapped in our webs, not because that's the purpose of our web, but because those are the experiences that we have. Those are the problems and the traumas and the complications in our lives. And then what we do is, instead of weaving around our web with ease and flow like a spider, we start spiraling around that bug. The people and the experiences that we have, the things that haunt us, the things that keep replaying, we're spiraling around that bug. We're giving it more mental energy, more physical energy, more emotional energy. It's just until it's like a cocoon. It's like we've encased it in our own webbing. And that doesn't mean we stop spiraling around it. Every time that bug gets triggered, we start spiraling around it again. That's why we feel those cycles. And that's why we need to break them. We need to free those bugs from our webs so that we can live with peace and with ease and with flow. None of this going around in circles over and over again. And once I came to that understanding, I could never see it any other way. All of a sudden, everyone at work that was complaining, all I noticed is, oh, what a cycle this is. And you'd hear them say that. You'd hear them say, it's like a never-ending cycle. And I'm thinking, if you can see that it's a never-ending cycle, what are you going to do about it? Then the same thing happened with my friends. Some friends are telling me the same story over and over and over again. And I'm thinking, and I'd say to them, you do that, don't you? When you recognize that you can finish their story, you tell them, yeah, I know you told me last week, and then finish the story. Yeah, and then they just keep telling you again. I'm thinking, why do they need to tell me this again when they know I know it? They're spiraling around that bug. And you can't stop them and say, start weaving your web again, honey. No. They're just going to keep spiraling. They have to get that story out. And if they need to tell me that and express that physically, mentally and emotionally, they must be spiraling around that experience. God knows how many times. And hey, none of us are immune to doing this. We all do this. We do this to ourselves and we do this to each other. And the reason is because we're stuck. We're stuck in a cycle. When you hear your friend talking about a relationship that they're in that you know that they shouldn't be in, and they deep down know they shouldn't be in, and there's constant issues that are never getting solved, and they just keep telling you, and they will tell you it's a vicious cycle. So we recognize that this is the truth of our lives, but we don't understand what it means, and we don't know how to fix it. And this is what I'm here for. This is why I created the Web of Life, because I want people to understand themselves and understand their cycles and then break them. So let me explain something to you about cycles real quick for you to understand how it works in your web. Because our webs are not these beautiful geometric masterpieces like you see when you go across a spider's web or when you get one smashed in your face while you're going for a walk. Our webs are a tangled mess. I'm just reminded, was it William Shakespeare? What a tangled web we weave. That's more practicing to deceive, but in saying that, we deceive ourselves. We lie to ourselves far more than we will ever lie to any other human being, and that's the truth. And how can we not? We are so tangled in our own web of life. We just want to pretend it isn't what it is, because people don't know what to do about it. So there are 3 types of cycles that you experience and that we have in our lives. Mental cycles, emotional cycles, and physical cycles. Not only do I understand all of this, but I've actually figured out how cycles are made and how cycles are broken. And we'll get to that in a minute. Now, mental cycles are your thoughts. The problem with mental cycles is that we can be spiraling mentally around a topic for hours on end without being able to stop ourselves. And the problem with that is that we are feeding energy to things that are not positive in our lives. And we don't do this when things are positive. We let that stuff go real quick. We dwell on the negative. So you have an experience, and in that experience, you experience emotion. And we often confuse our thoughts and our emotions. Emotions are things like happiness and sadness and anger. But we talk about, when we describe how we feel, we put thought into it and we express our thought and confuse that with our emotions. I feel like you're not being honest with me, and I feel like, and you say things like that. Those are not emotions, those are thoughts, but you're saying, I feel like. Now, an emotional cycle is a repeated feeling, repeated emotions. And the problem is, we perceive through the lens of emotion and then immediately start mentally cycling around it. And eventually, after you've been mentally spiraling and bringing up those emotions again and then cycling emotionally and mentally at the same time, eventually all of that energy has to come out of you. That's when a cycle becomes physical. And physical cycles never come out just one way. There's multiple ways for a physical cycle to be expressed. You just look at the easiest one is the cycle of unworthiness. This is very common in everyday people. It's a self-sphere cycle, but it's something that I'm really embarrassed to say it as a former teacher, but so many people have these beliefs about themselves that are so negative, and they came from teachers or they came from school in general. Things that people say, they have one experience and it can create a cycle that is held on to for a lifetime. And so, to explain this properly, I need to tell you how cycles are made. So we're going to go back to school for a sec. And you're in an art lesson. And you're drawing. And your teacher comes over and tells you that that's rubbish and you didn't follow the instructions. I remember teachers ripping pages out or scrunching pages up, things like that. So imagine your teacher said that to you and then taken your page off you, scrunched it up and threw it in the bin and told you to start again. That experience gave you knowledge, which you took as fact, although their perspective was circumstantial at best, and you're not factoring in their own mental and emotional state at the time, but you're experiencing that like they're telling you factual information about you. So from that, You might take the knowledge that you can't draw. That knowledge that then gets integrated into your developing self-concept and forms this belief when that mental cycle of I can't draw goes with that emotional cycle of sadness and how would you classify that emotion? That would be emotionally devastating. But let's just go with sadness, because you'd also feel embarrassed in front of a class to have something like that happen. But those emotions bind with that mental cycle of I can't draw. Now that you've got a mental and emotional cycle tied together, that's where a belief's formed. And the belief is that I can't draw. The only thing left to do is for that to be expressed. And that can be expressed in multiple ways. So when the mental and emotional cycle actually bind, you're integrating that. And that knowledge you take as fact. And that's what has to come out through your expression. Expression can be things that you say and do, but it might also be things that you won't say and things that you won't do. So maybe for the rest of your life, you tell people you can't draw, or when there's some kind of creative thing happening, if you don't say it verbally, you might not partake in that activity for the sheer fact that you feel ashamed and embarrassed and you don't want to be exposed as this person who can't draw, because that's this fundamental self-belief that you have that was formulated from one experience. And I cannot tell you how many parents of children I've taught, and also just fully grown adults, have these beliefs that are instilled in them based off something a teacher said one day. That's how quick and easy a cycle can form. But how many times someone has mentally and emotionally spiraled around that bug in their web, and how many ways that physically comes out, that's up to you. And a lot of us don't actually recognize how many types of physical expression or physical cycles we have of the mental and emotional ones. But those three, the mental, emotional, and physical cycles, I call them the trifecta. Because once that cycle that is mental and emotional is physically expressed in any way, shape, or form, an actual complete cycle has formed. That is the formation of a cycle. So an experience gives you knowledge. Knowledge is then integrated. After the integration phase comes the expression, and boom, you got a cycle from a bug in your web. So now, whenever you're weaving around your web, minding your own business, and something comes up about drawing, or somebody asks you to draw something or write something, you will bring up that cycle. That bug has been triggered. And it's kind of like, if you've ever seen a bug on the floor, say in your living room or kitchen or something, and you think it's dead. So you go to pick it up, and then as soon as you touch it, it starts wiggling around, and you freak out like, oh my God, I thought you were dead. Well, the same thing happens to the bugs in your web. Maybe you go for 5 years after trying to ignore anything to do with drawing, not having anything to do with it, and not partaking in any activity that brings that experience back to life in your mind. And then all of a sudden, you're a parent and one of your kids asks you to draw a star, and you freak out. You're like, no, that's okay, you do it. Or have a look on YouTube, or oh, you can do it, you don't need me, something like that. Maybe it's an inaction, or maybe you do it and you say, oh, well, don't worry, mine's not good, yours will be better than that. Both of those things are verbal expression. But the point is, you've re-triggered that bug, and that cycle is repeating while you're drawing that star, which might be simple, easy, and beautiful. In your mind, it's, I can't do this, I don't feel good, I don't like these feelings, I'm sad, I don't want to do this. It's not going to be good, I'm embarrassed, I don't want to show them this. All of these things are happening inside you, and that's the push, that's the force, that energy of the mental and emotional cycles makes it physical. And you will say things and you will do things because of it. So how do you break something like that? That is the important question that I think most people really like to get to know the answer to when they look at the Web of Life philosophy. It's one thing to understand how a cycle is made, whole different story for a cycle to be broken. And I wish I could tell you the answer came easily, but no, it didn't. I was staring at a poster on my wall that I had drawn of, I used to call it the cycle maker, but it's the formation of a cycle. every night I would stare at it. I had on my bedroom wall. And so at the time, I was looking at the cycles that I recognized in my own web, and some of the bugs particularly were in the childhood element, and that affected my relationships with people. And so I noticed some of the cycles that I had in my relationships and my childhood that I was working on breaking. And every night I would stare at the Cycle Maker poster on my wall and just wish that it was as easy to break cycles as it was to make them. And each individual cycle that I knew I was repeating in my life, I tried to break separately. And I was looking at the particular cycle like a standalone thing and trying a bunch of different strategies and seeing what worked and what didn't. But there wasn't really a framework that I had when I was doing this. I would just look at the relationship and the cycle that we had there and just try different strategies to break it. I would notice what experiences triggered the bug to resurface in my web and look at the bug and that experience and try different strategies to break it. And I was doing this with all the cycles in my life. And one day, longing for this process to be easy, because especially my relationship with my mother, it was a better part of about 6 years that I was trying a bunch of different strategies to improve our relationship and heal from my past and not let my past with her influence my perspective going into different experiences with her. And I couldn't stop that from happening. And whenever anything that happened in our relationship reminded me of the past, I would treat it like it was the past repeating itself and not me repeating a cycle. And 6 years of trying multiple different things and getting really nowhere. Even if something worked, it was fleeting, and then things would return back to the same cycle that it always was. And I'm staring at this Cycle Maker poster on my wall, and I just wish, why couldn't it be easy? Why couldn't it just be as simple as it is to make them? It happens with such ease. Why can't it be easy to break them? Why can't the process be so easy? And I'm thinking about all these things that people were doing, these things that were becoming so popular, and journaling and gratitude and vision boards. And at the time, there was a lot of conversation about rewriting your story. And so I thought maybe I should go back into my childhood and rewrite my story like those things never happened. And I wondered if that would work. And I started thinking about all of these things together that people were doing. And I just realized, hang on a minute, all of these things, it doesn't matter what they are individually, collectively, they're all the same thing. They're different forms of expression. And expression was the end of how a cycle is made. The last step for the formation of a cycle is expression. That's when things become physical. That sort of triggered a thought, and I thought to myself, what would happen if I drew the Cycle Maker in reverse? And so with that in mind, I grabbed a piece of paper, and I didn't even get to finish it. So going backwards, it's expression, integration, knowledge, and experience. I didn't even get to finish the word knowledge. I just wrote no, and I stopped and I realized, oh my God, that's the answer. And it was in front of me for years. Couldn't believe it. And then thinking back into the books that were massive, like The Secret, that's exactly what it was doing. To be able to break the cycle, you start with different forms of expression. And that might be, I remember it was saying in the book, if you wanted a relationship and you were not in one, to live like you're in a relationship. So that physical expression may be separating your closet to have half of it empty, as if somebody else was going to come and fill that space. Sleeping on one side of the bed. If you wanted a specific car, go and test drive it so you get the experience, that feeling of being in it, and you can make that your own, and then you use that for visualization and meditation. And then I realized when you keep doing things like this for expression, when you create that vision board, when you write those journal entries as if they're in the future, what you're actually doing is starting to integrate that experience into your life. You're living like it's happening now. And that's what the expression serves to do. So that first phase to break a cycle is you creating multiple forms of expression for the cycle being broken. You're not focusing on the cycle itself that you're stuck in. You're projecting into the future, but you're living like it's happening now. And so what those forms of expression serve to do is take you out of the past cycle that you've been stuck in, even though in the present moment it's still part of your experience. You're trying to bring the experience of that new cycle from the future into the present. So you might have vision boards and visualize the positive experience transforming your life. And you might do things and say things and sing things and watch things. Everything you do is expressing the future that you're trying to bring into the present. And what that does is helps you start to integrate aspects of that future into your current life. And so through that process of integration, you start to create new mental and emotional cycles. Not this is how it is and I can't do this and I feel this. It's I can feel this, I can think this, starting to make it a reality. And then you get into the phase of knowledge. And knowledge and integration kind of works hand in hand. Whereas when cycles are usually made, they're usually made based in fear. And fear-based cycles are kind of fast-tracked because that experience can rapidly turn into knowledge. It's integrated into that fear space really quickly, really easily, and it's expressed for a long, long time. But because you're reversing that process and it's done through love and not through fear, it takes a little bit more work to go through the integration phase, and the knowledge phase is actually to help you do that. So you've integrated that possibility into your mind and body, but you're also starting to integrate knowledge from other different places. And the beauty of this technologically connected world that we have is there are so many different sources of information. So if you're trying to start a new cycle, so if we're going to the drawing belief that you had about yourself and you're wanting to break that cycle and create a new one, it's not as simple as like rewriting a story by deleting it and rewriting a new one. You can't just replace a cycle with a new one and it erases the past. It doesn't work that way. But you need to start to embrace and embody that new cycle coming into your life so that the old one slowly fades away. You give more power and momentum to the new cycle through the knowledge. So you might listen to podcasts about drawing and artistry and how everybody's an artist, and you read quotes about everybody embracing art and art imitates life and things like that. You might watch interviews, you might watch documentaries, you might watch YouTube videos and start to practice embodying that knowledge, but having that experience. And so when you start to pull information from different sources, that feeds your mind into believing that new possibility, because you need to formulate a new belief. So the purpose of the knowledge phase is to feed yourself as much information as possible about your new cycle to help you integrate that information and bring that experience into your life. The actual process of breaking a cycle and creating that new one, the experience of it happening naturally on its own is the last thing you get. But the work that you do through expression, integration, and knowledge helps get you there. And expression isn't just finished at the start and then you go into integration. It's a continuous process. So what I found particularly helpful when I was breaking my own cycles, particularly the childhood ones, was the journal writing side of things. So I used to write journal entries about the new cycle with my experience with my mom and our relationship improving, and I kind of created journal entries talking about the day we spent together, and it was a day that had never happened, and at the time a part of me still had that doubt that it never would. So I went crazy with that thought. Oh, we went overseas together in that journal entry, went to Vietnam. And so I wrote the story, the journal entry, like it just happened. And I just come back from this overseas trip with my mum, and how much we bonded and shared, and, you know, how over dinner one night we had a conversation about the past and apologies and hugs and tears, and all the love was just shared. And how I felt writing that journal entry, that expression gave me the emotion, and it gave me the desire, the mental desire to make that experience my reality. And it doesn't matter if we never went overseas together. We can do lunches and things now. This is something that has never ever happened in my entire history with my mother. But the journal entries was always what I went back to, because in the process of breaking a cycle, you will always go back. Just like it's easier to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. It's why when you're in the relationship that you know you shouldn't be in and you want to get out of, but you just keep doing what's easy, what's familiar, because it takes no effort from you to repeat the cycles that you've been repeating your whole life. To form a new one, that takes effort, and you will fail. And that's part of the process. It's in the failure that you actually learn. I had to face the doubts that I had, not only about myself, but my abilities to make these things my reality. Those things come up. That's why you fall back. And when you do that, you learn about yourself, and you have to confront those parts. That's the work you need to do. But I didn't just break cycles in relationships and heal things from my past. There were physical cycles that needed to be broken too, like my cigarette addiction that had been going since I was 12. And I'd broken it once for 5 years. So I knew I could do it. And most people with addictions will know that they can do it, but it's that application to see it through. And so what I found when I was breaking physical cycles, we always see those things as the problem. If you're a drinker or a smoker or a massive gambler or online shopper, or you've got like social media addictions, shopping addictions, all those sorts of things, it doesn't matter what the physical cycle is. Most people see those things as the problem in their lives, and they try to fix that problem only. When you focus only on breaking a physical cycle, you're not actually treating the problem, you're treating the symptom. It's like when you're training for a marathon. You don't just train for that last 10 seconds before you cross the finish line and act like you're an Olympian and, you know, breaking that ribbon across the finish line. If you're just going to practice that, what chance do you have of actually completing the race? You need to be practicing your warm-ups. You need to be training for that experience, and you need to keep doing it over and over again. And you're not always going to finish. You're going to fall. You're going to get tired. You're going to have a break. You're just not going to feel like you're at your best, but you have to keep going. And breaking a cycle is just like that. And when you focus purely on the physical cycle alone, you're doing yourself an injustice in the long run, because yeah, you might stop that physical act, that problem in your life, but mentally and emotionally, the things that force you into that physical expression, they haven't been dealt with at all. So when those things keep coming up, when you've had this go-to, this solution in your mind to cope with those things for however long, and then you just fix that coping situation and replace it with something else, long term, that doesn't work out, which is why so many people go back. So when I started focusing on breaking that physical cycle of smoking, what I noticed was the physicality of it didn't need to be dealt with. The mental and emotional side did. And so when I started breaking that cycle and looking at the beliefs that were created from the mental and emotional cycles, I had these crazy ass beliefs about smoking. In my head, I thought, it helps me problem solve. When I've got something going on in my life, that gives me time for reflection. And that helps me figure out what I'm going to do the next day. Or when I was a teacher, it would help me figure out what my next lesson's going to be. It didn't do shit. But that's what I was telling myself. And then that feeling of a break and that feeling of relief and that downtime that it gave me, that's the euphoria, that's the happiness that it gave me. It didn't make me happy to smoke. And considering I was like the fitness teacher and the yoga teacher and running around with the kids all the time, it was almost unfathomable that someone like me could be doing something like that when everything that I displayed was the opposite of doing something like that. And so when I was focusing on breaking the mental and emotional cycles, it was the hard part. Quitting smoking afterwards was a breeze. But that hard work was breaking the mental and emotional cycles. And when you're actually going through the expression phase, it's great, it's easy, it's fun. You can say the things, you can do the things that make that new cycle that you're bringing into your life seem more desirable. You want to create that insatiable desire because eventually you're going to have to do the work. And so when the integration and the knowledge phase come, that's where I started to face it all, to face these crazy beliefs that I had about smoking. And they're quite ridiculous, but that enabled me to feel like I was doing the right thing for myself at the time. That was the excuse that I made to make it okay, that I was doing something that I really didn't agree with me doing. And so when it came to knowledge and integration, I was able to use things like hypnotherapy and meditation and breathing and breath work to be able to create a new cycle. And so the experience of being a non-smoker became real easy. And that doesn't mean I don't have moments where I fail, but I think about the mental and emotional cycles that got me to that physical expression. I don't just think, oh, I had a cigarette or vaped or whatever. So that's the key, is understanding that when you make those mistakes and go back, it's not the end of the world. But that's the point where you need to get real introspective and reflective with this perspective of the web of life and understand the big picture of what you're doing and why. And that's where you get the power to break it. So that's the web of life philosophy in a nutshell. That's the 8 fundamental elements, the 4 strands, the 3 spheres, and how cycles are made and how cycles are broken. So thanks for being here with me for this ep. New ones will come out for you every other Thursday. If you're keen to get your hands on a copy of the book, just head to my website, www.weboflife.au. And while you're there, you can download your free PDF of the complete Web of Life philosophy. All the links are included in the show notes. Now, if you'd like to stay up to date in the world of Ali Ammo, follow me on socials. Episode 1, tick!